Recommendation from MPs that there should be a separate 6 o'clock news for Scotland. Now, a report from the Culture, Media and Sport Committee has called for the programme to be edited and presented from Scotland and aimed at Scottish audiences with a broader remit of national, UK and international stories. Well, joining me now to discuss whether this could work is the director of the Scottish Newspaper Society, John McClellan, who is in Edinburgh and on the Isle of Lewis. I'm joined by the journalist and former Labour Minister, Brian Wilson. Gentlemen, it's good to see you both. Thanks for being with us. First of all, if I could start with Brian, is this a good idea?
Sorry.
Hello there. Sorry, can you hear me? Hello, Brian, can you hear me? Oh dear. Okay, okay. Let's lose that then for a second. Hopefully we'll try and re-establish that line with Brian. John, I'll start with you. Does this make sense, this idea of a Scotland-only 6 o'clock news?
Yes, I think it does. The complex landscape is unfolding in Scotland as far as politics is concerned, and there's virtually no decision that that stands alone now, especially given the devolvement of taxation powers to the Scottish Parliament, and it makes coverage of news so much more complicated. And I think that the arrival of a purely Scottish national news programme will be a better place to tackle that.
Okay, Brian, can you hear me now?
I can, yep.
Jolly good. Great to hear from you, Brian. I was just asking the question there if this was a good idea. I've just asked John that. Do you think it makes sense to have a Scottish 6 o'clock news?
No, I don't. I mean, I think, John, probably we share the same objective as better news coverage in Scotland, better coverage of current affairs. But, you know, the last place I would start would be by duplicating something which is at present a fairly satisfactory arrangement. We don't, for instance, have a television, an investigative current affairs programme at all. The existing Scottish news isn't great. And the one certainty is that this channel would benefit because, of course, people would be able to choose between the UK news output here, or else they would stick with a Scottish-generated programme. I think largely this is, if we're looking at it journalistically and editorially, there's a lot of other things to be done. And of course, if you're looking at it politically, this is a long-term objective, which is another thing just about dividing the UK and kind of weakening the bonds that tie us together.
John McClellan, the suggestion from the public and from polls is that there's no great appetite for this.
Well, I think the public will get a chance to make a decision when they see what the programme's like. I just from a journalistic point of view, the current arrangement, to my mind, throws up too many confusions and from the other point of view, too many duplications, where we get Scottish news covered on the UK segment, and then almost an identical bulletin on the Scottish news to follow. So it seems to me that the current arrangement has too many anomalies, and that it shouldn't be such a great leap to be able to sort them out.
Brian, I mean, this has been an idea that's floated since the 1990s. So much has changed, hasn't it, as far as devolution is concerned? The strength of the SNP, not only in Scotland, but in Westminster as well. There does seem to be, this does seem to be a sensible idea on some levels.
Well, I understand that superficially sounds reasonable, but I think you have to understand what's driving it. And for the reasons I said, I don't think that's an editorial imperative. I think it is far more a political one. But I think the BBC could be more sensitive to the anomalies that John talks about. We've been listening tonight to a very interesting story about the NHS England and the IV drug. Now, it would take very little editorial sensitivity to recognise that people in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland are asking the question, what's the situation here and how does this judgment indirectly likely affect them? Now, that would be a very small editorial tweak on the part of BBC News, which would remove one of the anomalies that is sometimes quite irritating. There's very, very few stories which are actually totally English or totally Scottish in spite of devolution, but it needs some editorial sensitivity in order to recognise that and reflect it.
John McClellan, just a few tweaks are necessary. We don't have to go all the way in having a full half hour specifically for Scotland. And what about Wales and Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the problem is that there's hardly any story now coming out of the political landscape which doesn't require a tweak, and I think from a viewer's point of view that becomes more and more unsatisfactory, where every story that's broadcast in a UK-wide news programme has to come with caveats that take into account the differing positions taken in the nations. So I mean, I absolutely understand where Brian's coming from a political point of view. I don't think this is from that point of view necessarily a risk-free venture, but I think that the benefits in terms of a consistent and caveat-free news coverage are there to be had. I think the other aspect of this, which is not to be forgotten, is that it looks like STV won't follow suit. So the readers, I'm in old tech, sorry, the viewers will have choice, and I think choice is certainly going to be a good thing.
Finally, Brian Wilson, you think this is going to be over the top. So journalistically then, what more do you think the BBC should be doing to better serve Scottish audiences?
Well, I've made that point that if we enough recognition that we're taught literally a sentence would have covered it to turn what sounds...
Brian, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, with the line from the Isle of Lewis. It's great that we got it going to begin with, but it failed us, I'm afraid. So, gentlemen, I do apologise for that. John McClellan and Brian Wilson on the Isle of Lewis. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks very much.